Folks, most people slicing bread for breakfast this morning have no idea what's actually sitting inside that loaf. I had 10 of the biggest bread brands in America tested. Not by me, mind you, but pulled straight off grocery store shelves by Florida's Department of Health and sent to a certified lab. 6 out of 8 came back positive for glyphosate, the active chemical in Roundup. Not out on the farm where you'd expect to find it, in the finished loaf you're slicing up for your kids' sandwiches every single day. Now here's what nobody's telling you at the checkout counter. Some of the worst results didn't come from the cheap store brands. They came from the ones wearing organic labels. The loaves marketed straight at health-conscious families, the ones folks pay extra for specifically because they think they're making the safer choice. One brand tested above 1,000 parts per billion of glyphosate, one of the highest numbers ever recorded in a packaged consumer bread. And you're going to recognize the name when we get to it. I've farmed this land better than 4 decades, and I'll tell you, a label that says organic or healthy is a promise, not a proof. Today, we're working through all 10, worst to best, and finishing up with 3 brands that came back clean and are actually worth putting in your cart. Let's start with Great Value Whole Wheat, Walmart's own house bread, the one that fills carts because it's cheap, familiar, and always sitting on the shelf. Before you even open the bag, press on it. It doesn't feel like bread at all. It compresses flat and bounces right back like a foam cushion shaped into a loaf. That alone ought to tell you something engineered is going on in there. Independent lab testing found 340 parts per billion of glyphosate in this bread. Now, regulators will tell you that's perfectly legal. The EPA's ceiling for wheat sits way up at 30,000 parts per billion. But that number was worked out for one chemical in one food for one healthy adult all by itself. It was never built to account for a fella already taking blood pressure medicine, already picking up glyphosate off his morning cereal and his afternoon crackers, then loading up again at supper. Exposure stacks up in a body. The regulation math never did. Walmart brought in over $713 billion last year. Sourcing cleaner grain isn't a money problem at that size. It's a choice about where the margin sits. The 80 cents you saved came with something extra that never made it onto the label. Now here's one that'll surprise you. Market Pantry Organic, Target's house brand. Target spent years building itself up as the cleaner, smarter alternative, the store young families choose because it feels like a step above. Their organic whole wheat sandwich bread carries the full USDA organic seal right there on the front. Tested at 348 parts per billion, higher than Wonder Bread, higher than Nature's Own. An organic loaf outscoring the conventional stuff in contamination. Here's how that happens. It's called drift. When a conventional farm next door sprays herbicide, that mist doesn't stop politely at the fence line. It travels on the wind. USDA Organic only certifies that the grower didn't spray glyphosate themselves. It says nothing about what blew in from the neighbour's field, because drift testing isn't required, and Target doesn't publish any. A parent reaches for that loaf specifically to protect their kids, pays the premium, sees the seal, and trusts it. The certification's honest, the contamination's real too. Nobody's required to tell you about the gap between the two. Then there's Oro Wheat Organic, and this is the story of a craft brand that quietly stopped being one. 2 families started baking together in Los Angeles back in 1932, built a genuine regional institution, family-owned, California-made, built on quality. In 2009, Grupo Bimbo bought it out. Since then, Bimbo swallowed up Arnold, Sara Lee, Entenmann's, Thomas, Ballpark, and a good deal more besides. One multinational now runs what most folks still think are separate competing brands on the shelf. When Bimbo takes over, the supply chain follows right behind. Same flour suppliers, same wheat sources, possibly the same grain treated with glyphosate as a pre-harvest drying agent across their whole industrial network. Testing found 70 parts per billion back in 2018, and there's been no independent testing published on this bread since. Bimbo pulls in $22 billion a year. If they're testing every batch, they sure haven't shown their work. Long-time buyers say the old bread used to be denser, grainier, more honest in texture. What's on the shelf now is uniform, soft, and built to hold that softness through weeks on a retail shelf. You're paying for a logo that stopped meaning what it used to. Next up, Nature's Own, the flagship of Flowers Foods, a $5 billion company. And that name's doing a lot of heavy lifting. Natural, wholesome, a bread that implies it came from somewhere real. Testing on their butter bread came back at 190 parts per billion. Their perfectly crafted white at 132. But the glyphosate's only half the story here. Look at the rest of that ingredient panel. Calcium propionate, a preservative that peer-reviewed research has tied to behavioural effects in kids. Datem, a chemically modified fat. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, an emulsifier that holds that engineered softness for weeks past any natural freshness window. Squeeze the bag. That pillowy give isn't freshness. That's a formula at work. Folks have soaked a single slice, wrung it out completely, and watched it spring right back to shape without tearing. That's not bread behaving, that's a sponge shaped like one. There's a class action lawsuit out of California right now alleging Flowers falsely markets certain Nature's Own products as having no artificial preservatives, while ascorbic acid sits right there on the label. Flowers has denied it. At $5 billion a year, cleaner sourcing isn't out of reach for this company. It just costs a little margin. And margin's what gets protected first. Now let's talk about Arnold Organic. On shelves since 1940. And when the organic line came out, health-conscious shoppers figured a legacy brand was finally living up to its own name. USDA Organic on the front, whole grains listed first, the combination that signals trust without asking you to dig any further. Arnold's owned by Bimbo Bakeries too, same $22 billion operation as Orowheat. Here's the specific trouble. Sara Lee's been tested. Nature's Own has been tested. Dave's Killer Bread's been tested more than once by more than one lab. Arnold Organic, from that very same parent company, has no publicly available glyphosate results anywhere we could find. We can't tell you it had matched Sara Lee's worst number because the data simply doesn't exist out where you can see it. What we can tell you is Bimbo's record on every other brand they run makes that silence awful hard to explain away. They paid for the organic certification. They haven't shown you what it actually delivers. Then there's Wonder Bread, which doesn't even pretend to be organic. It claims to be the American family staple, the loaf your grandmother trusted. Testing found 173 parts per billion of glyphosate in the classic white. Now read the ingredient label alongside that number. Calcium sulfate, the same compound used in construction drywall. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, monocalcium peroxide, enriched bleached wheat flour, stripped bare in processing, then fortified back up with synthetic vitamins to replace what got taken out. Wonder Bread's owned by Flowers Foods too, same supply chain as Nature's Own. 2 slices a day for 40 years runs close to 30,000 individual servings. Breakfast toast, lunch sandwich, the bun that every backyard cookout for 4 decades straight. Here's the one hopeful thing worth knowing though. Your body starts working that chemical load back down the moment you stop adding to it. The next clean slice matters more than every contaminated one behind you. Close behind is Sara Lee honey wheat, in American kitchens for 70 years. Birthday cakes, holiday desserts, and this honey wheat sandwich loaf with its warm golden packaging. Testing found 191 parts per billion, the highest single reading in that whole Florida testing round. Higher than Wonder Bread, higher than Nature's Own. Sara Lee's owned by Bimbo too, acquired back in 2011. Read that label close. Honey's in the product name, but corn syrup is what's actually in the ingredients. One's marketing, the other's what's sweetening your bread. Keep reading and you'll find calcium sulfate again, right alongside monoglycerides and datum. For anybody managing their blood sugar, that formula is working against them with every single slice. A video went around showing this bread sitting at room temperature for over 3 months with no visible mold at all. Bread that refuses to spoil wasn't built for a human body. It was built for a warehouse shelf. Now we're getting into the ones that'll genuinely surprise you. Pepperidge Farm, the red bag, the old-fashioned lettering, a name that sounds like it belongs to a farmhouse with a stone wall out front. Owned by the Campbell Company, over $10 billion a year in revenue. Independent testing found 587 parts per billion in their 100% whole grain whole wheat, and their Jewish rye and pumpernickel deli swirl came back at 531, nearly 3 times what Nature's Own recorded. Their farmhouse hearty white, to be fair, showed nothing detectable in that same round, so it's not uniform across the whole brand. But the whole grain and rye lines run among the worst we've found anywhere. Here's why. Glyphosate gets sprayed as a pre-harvest desiccant, right onto standing grain to speed up drying before the combine ever comes through. That last spray, days before harvest, concentrates residue right in the outer hull of the kernel, and whole wheat bread keeps that hull. So the loaf marketed as the healthier choice can carry more contamination than plain white bread made from flour that stripped that outer layer clean away. Bayer, who bought out Monsanto and makes this chemical, has already paid around $11 billion, settling nearly 100,000 lawsuits from folks who developed cancer, with more settlement money proposed this year. Bayer still denies the chemical causes it. And then there's Dave's Killer Bread, the one health-conscious shoppers reach for without a second thought. Bold packaging, dense, seedy loaves, a redemption story right on the bag. USDA organic, non-GMO verified. Nutritionists recommend it. Trainers recommend it. Testing still found glyphosate in it. 136 parts per billion in one round, single digits to low double digits in another. Lower than the conventional brands, sure, but lower isn't zero. And a brand that built its whole identity on being the gold standard made a specific promise it hasn't fully kept. Flowers Foods bought this company in 2015 for $275 million and expanded it nationwide almost overnight through their own distribution network. Same parent as Wonder Bread and Nature's Own. The founder's story stayed right there on the bag. The industrial supply chain moved in quietly behind it. And that brings us to the one that made me question whether any label in that whole bread aisle means what it says. 365 by Whole Foods, owned by Amazon. Independent testing found glyphosate at 1,040 parts per billion in their whole wheat sandwich bread, among the highest numbers recorded in any branded consumer bread anywhere. Whole Foods built its whole reputation on what it refused to sell. No bromated flour, no artificial colours, over 80 banned substances on their published list. The test result doesn't match the message on the wall. Since Amazon bought the company in 2017, former executives have talked openly about a more centralized, more industrial supply chain, replacing the sourcing philosophy the store was built on. You did everything right. Paid the premium, trusted the reputation, picked the house organic loaf specifically because of what that store claimed to stand for. And the lab found over 1,000 parts per billion of weed killer sitting right inside it. Now, here's the three that actually held up under all that testing, and they earned it honestly. Food for Life Ezekiel 4:9 uses no flour at all, sprouts 6 organic whole grains and legumes, and bakes them low and slow to hold on to the nutrition. Carries the Biochart's non-glyphosate certified seal, meaning the finished loaf tested clean, not just the growing process. Family owned out of Corona, California since 1964, never sold off. 1 Degree Organics publishes the actual farm behind every single ingredient. Scan the code on the bag and trace your wheat back to the specific field it grew in. They test random samples every month with an outside lab, something no law requires them to do. And Silver Hills Sprouted Bakery, a Canadian family company, carries that same non-glyphosate seal on everything they make, and changed their own sourcing standards the moment the World Health Organization flagged this chemical as a probable carcinogen back in 2015. A company responding to the evidence instead of arguing with it. Here's the one rule worth carrying out of this whole investigation. Stop buying bread that sits at room temperature with more than 5 ingredients on the label. Real bread is flour, water, salt, yeast, maybe a little healthy oil. Everything past that got added to stretch the shelf life, fake the freshness, or shave down the cost. The organic seal only tells you nobody sprayed on purpose. It says nothing about what showed up in the finished loaf. Look instead for biochecked non-glyphosate certified or non-GMO project verified, because those two actually require testing the bread itself, not just the paperwork behind it. Clean bread runs you maybe 50 cents more a slice at the high end. That's a whole lot cheaper than managing the health problems that build up over decades of exposure nobody ever told you about. The labels in that aisle were built to earn your trust without doing the work to deserve it. Now you know how to see past them.